Hey everyone, it's Kerr from Daydream Nation, and look who's back, John Clauser. How are you, my man?
Brother, freezing. It's cold up here.
Freezing.
Baby, it's cold outside.
Yes. Well, it's summertime in Australia, and it's going to be about 34 or 35 degrees Celsius. So I don't know what that's going to be Fahrenheit, but
Toasty.
Yeah, I know. Opposite ends of the world. That's what happens. Today we're going to do a really fun episode. We're going to cover the second album by W.A.S.P, and that is The Last Command. So there you go. So this came out in 1984. W.A.S.P had a slight change up of lineup. You had Blackie Lawless, Chris Holmes, Randy Piper, and Steve Riley on drums. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our first impressions of the album and do a deep dive, track by track, what we like, what we don't like, if any, and come up with a final synopsis as what we think of the album in 2022, 2023. So, John, I know you're a huge fan of W.A.S.P, and tell us what your first impressions of this album were in the day.
Wow. So I got the vinyl and I had the little lyric sticker thingy on the back, the big, and this was an obnoxious one. This wasn't the parental guidance thing. No, this was like a big rectangular sticker saying something about offensive lyrics or whatever. So, and this was like early, I think it was like one of the earliest albums to get one of those things. After the whole PMRC thing. So, of course, that meant I had to have the album, being such a big fan of the first one. So yeah, so you get this, you get this awesome cover with Blackie, just Blackie, no band, just Blackie. You get the band on the backside, but you don't get the full band. But anyway, so the first track just kicks off. You get that intro, that historic intro, Wild Child, and you're off to the races. That song just has, with the way the lyrics come at you, they're just essential in this danger that you kind of feel, which is really, for a 15, 16-year-old back in those days, that was really cool. I really dug. That's what I dug so much about this album. But then you get that middle section with the guitar interlude thing, and I just love that part. I always loved that part. So you get such a classic. So of course, they're still doing it today live. I can attest to that since I just saw them last month. Can't believe it's been a month since I saw them. But anyway, awesome first track, but there's one thing that I noticed a little bit different, and that, of course, was Steve Riley. Steve Riley's drum style, not quite as, I don't know, compared to Tony Richards, I just felt his drum sound was just so, there was just a crispness and a rawness to it. And you could definitely tell this one is a lot more slicker produced. And I don't know if Riley's drums were just that much mixed down, but he just seemed like it was just a very light touch on the rides. Yeah, everything just didn't seem as upfront as you had on the first album. So that's one thing you notice. Of course, you get the polished guitar sound, as I mentioned. Wild Child, but classic song, absolute classic song.
All right. Well, I'll tell you my first impressions, then I'll go into Wild Child as well. So.
Sorry.
No, that's cool. So W.A.S.P was going the rounds in high school. They had a bit of danger, shock rock. They're the sort of band that, would piss off your parents, So when you're like, 14 or 15, you're in that rebellious stage. And we were going through this stage of gravitating to bands that, was sort of anti-establishment and anti-parents, and, sort of the music that sort of like would be kind of shocking to that previous generation. So Iron Maiden was very big in those days. obviously AC/DC, but in a circle of friends, metalheads at school, W.A.S.P was definitely doing the rounds. And that first album definitely made an impact. The second album comes out, and the first single that was shown and even made it onto our music shows was Blind in Texas. Blackie comes out to Australia, does a promo tour, and I never forget when he said, wouldn't you like to see me under your Christmas tree? He is blind in Texas, and he was in the full sort of garb, and yeah. And we've got a record store in Sydney, which is still going strong to this day, called Utopia Records. And Blackie Lawless did an in record store signing, and the queues went for miles.
Wow.
Blackie was a definitely an interesting character, and I'll talk more about that as we get into the show at that particular time. But it certainly left an impression, and I bought the record. This is a later pressing. Obviously, it's a Japanese with the Ovi strip, but I bought a record in the day, and it completely worn out. And to be quite frank, it's one of my favorites. Even though I kind of think the first album is better, I still think this album has got a lot to recommend, and there's a lot happening. So we go into Wild Child. So Wild Child, what I understand, was workshopped, I think, previously, and there could be some conjecture with our audience, was previously workshopped in London, the band London, that mythical band, that mysterious band in LA, which I've actually had the pleasure of seeing when I was went over with my wife in one of the later incarnations. And it seems like it's a band that everybody has been through. Nikki Sixx, Blackie Lawless, the who's who have gone through this band. But this apparently was workshopped between Nikki Sixx and Blackie Lawless. I think it's a great opening track. And I describe it as Texas Gothic, because I think this album, they were really, even with the video clips, a lot of it was set in the desert. Now, I think Blackie lived in Arizona, so a lot of it was in that desert feel. But obviously, a lot of these clips are set in Texas, and it's got that sort of that imagery of, the Wild West, and yeah, it's very much Gothic. And even when you listen to it on the headphones, it's got the rattlesnake. You've got all these sound effects. Sonically, it's widescreen. So where the first album was kind of rough, raw, punky, shock rock, this is different production. It's a step up. And they used the producer, Spencer Proffer, who did Quiet Riot Mental Health. 6 million albums later, I think Blackie said, yeah, we need that guy. And you can see the production values on this album are $1 million. And you have all these little special effects. There's a lot happening. And Blackie at the time said that one of my favorite bands is the Beatles. And I wanted this to be my Sgt. Pepper. So it's amazing. In the metal world, there's all these artists. They always go back to the Beatles. And they always seem to reference, this is my Sgt. Pepper, which means, hey, we're ramping it up. We're going up a notch here. This is my Sgt. Pepper. I think it's a great song. It's got soul. It's got mystery. It's as I said, it's Gothic, and it's an outstanding opening track. And I think this should have been the first single, not Blind in Texas, because Blind in Texas, I'll talk about that more later, was kind of, it gave a misrepresentation of what the band is. Yeah. This song is W.A.S.P to me, Wild Child. Free spirits, get the Harleys out with that Gothic element.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would agree with that. Yeah. I would definitely agree with that assessment. I never knew the London part, though. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So there's Nikki Sixx had something to do with it, but it's an amazing band, that London band, and they're legends on the Sunset Strip because, as I said, If you look at the decline of Western civilization, the documentary, I think London are mentioned in that, they were kind of at the epicenter, and you would have put them in we should have been a contender. They just didn't quite make it, but so many degrees of separation with the metal scene is with that one band.
Yeah.
But Blackie was only in it for very, very briefly. And if you look at his CV, he's been in a lot of bands that, albeit quite briefly, like New York Dolls.
I mean, starting with the New York Dolls, and of course he does the Sister and Circus and stuff like that. And
yes.
So
yeah. What do you think of Ball Crusher?
When I was 16, great track. 53, it's kind of low on my totem pole now. Again, Ball Crusher was one of those songs where it just ramps your testosterone up, and it just gets you feeling like, okay, I gotta watch out for this wicked, vicious woman, and hope you don't find something like that. But I mean, I think it was fun. It was fun at 16, but it's not a track that has aged well for me. In my opinion, I like I said, it's just it's still a good track. I think one thing I noticed is that W.A.S.P got away from I was mentioning this when I was talking to somebody about the medleys that they always do in concerts, and they did like 3 songs from the first album in this when I saw them, and I got thinking about it. I said, what was the one thing that cut out of those songs? Basically, the guitar solo and the outro chorus. There was never another verse after the guitar solos on that first record, if you think about it. So on a lot of those songs, like On Your Knees and Torture Never Stops and The Flame. So they basically got the lyrics in, or the verses, but there's in bridge, but there's they cut out the solo and the outro. With this album, you get a solo, but then there's another verse. So it would have been a little tougher to do some of those medley stuff like that. And of course, you gotta love they gotta push that little envelope. Before I go and leave her in my dust, I'm going till she can't stand up. So you gotta have the pick scrapes just to throw that little innuendo to the PMRC to beat them a little bit. But
the PRMC is all over this album, isn't it? Because it was all happening, and I think they were Blackie was deliberately pushing the envelope, because there's nothing, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Any publicity is good for record sales.
Yeah.
So,
it's what cancel culture is nowadays. When you really stop to look at it, it's like everybody's like, well, what's so bad about this? Why are people getting canceled in today's culture? Well, that's you got to look for this stuff, and okay, it gets more publicity, so go for it. When I saw them, they had this 3-minute video before they do Animal, and they talk about the whole censorship thing, and they talk about Last Command being one of the first records to get those obnoxious labels. The PMRC singled them out for that.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I think this is a bit of a throwaway track, so I don't think it's a strong one. And with an album, when you've got a killer first track, you need a great follow-up, and it's probably not the best track in the album to follow up. So it's not one of my favorites, and it hasn't really aged well, but it's no worse than Kiss in the era or Motley Crue. I could imagine Motley Crue. It's in their wheelhouse. Yep.
I completely agree with that.
What about the next one? Fistful of Diamonds. I kind of
Fistful of Diamonds.
I like it.
It is a good track. Again, I kind of not aged well for me again, but not as bad as Ball Crusher. I like the song. It definitely talks about, the whole being famous thing, and you're getting all this money and you're getting things that nobody can buy kind of thing, like Elvis's bed or whatever. Anyway, but you get all these kind of, I think it's a good story. I think it tells a good story in the song. And I think it's something a lot of people in the 80s were certainly aspiring to. They wanted all of the stuff, they wanted to be, it was a big consumerism, big greed thing.
Greed is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Predates Gordon Gekko and Wall Street, but yeah.
Correct. But yeah, so again, for me, maybe not aged totally well, but again, it's not as bad as Ball Crusher, but it's still, I think even still today, I think a lot of people still could relate to this song and they still go after all the stuff. So
yeah,
good track.
I kind of disagree with you a little bit. I think this is one of my favorite tracks. It's a deep cut. I wouldn't imagine it's in the live set, but it's interesting. It's got some really interesting lyrics, and it just talks about capitalism. It's got something to say. So I think it's one of Blackie Lawless's more interesting lyrics. And it's definitely talking about not the nether regions, but, yeah.
Well, and here again, it's getting away from, it's all, you can already tell they're getting away from some of the topics that they covered on the first album. Yeah. Would you have expected to hear Fistful of Diamonds on the first album?
No. There is a maturity in the songwriting all the way through, and you can see he's landing the foundations for later, more serious works like The Headless Children and,
Idol. Yeah,
albums like that. All right, Jack Action.
I always felt, to me, Jack Action was actually always my least favorite track on the album. And that's not to say that it's a bad song. Again, it's kind of like the first album. It's like how you pick your 5 favorites. It's like, with that album. In this one, it's a little bit of the same way. But Jack Action always was one that I kind of was like the least favorite for me. But as I was listening to it again recently, and I was like, there's a lot of actually really interesting stuff going on here. You got some little like pedal stuff going on with some of this like synthesizer stuff going on in the background a little bit. And, you got that just driving rhythm, and again, not a song you would expect to hear from the first album, telling the story of like a revenge kind of thing, but still still a decent song, but it was always like one of my least favorites on this one.
Well, we're a bit contrarian today, my friend, from the United States. I like this song a lot, and the song's been in my head. I played this yesterday afternoon, and you know how there are songs that get in, like earworm, and I can hear it now. It's in my head. Out of all the whole album, this song, even maybe the little machine gun at the end. I like it. It's a nifty little song, and again, it's got a sense of humor. Blackie has got a very dark sense of humor that people don't get. And if you read the lyrics at face value, you go, "Oh, he's sexist and this and that," but you got to understand, it's tongue in cheek. He is a very articulate, smart guy, and he may be, he's having a wink with you. So a nudge and a wink. Another thing I want to mention, and I know when we had our show in April, I was talking about Blackie's vocals. When I listen to this, it's so Noddy Holder from Slade. I've got to do a reach out, and Kevin DeBrow. You get those 3 guys together, and wow, you'd have the levery tone. And it's really distinct, because in metal, you've got to have that voice that has cut through. And in the day, there were so many cookie cutter type of vocalists that were trying to sound like a Robert Plant or a David Coverdale or whatnot. But the ones that stuck out, whether it's Dee Schneider, Kevin DeBrow, or Blackie Lawless, had that distinctive raw voice that sort of had the cut through and could project it. And never seeing W.A.S.P, I could imagine he's got that projected voice.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen him back in the day. That would have been because I could have compared it better to when I saw him last month. You have the whole thing of backing tracks going on, which I get. You got 66 years old. You got to boost the voice up in some way, shape, or form. It's not for the lead vocal. It's just helping. It's just extra tracks of vocals, but it's still. I couldn't tell it. So it was.
Yeah.
It sounded very strong to me. I didn't hear a bad note out of him. So.
Yeah, I am conflicted on that topic. I see the pros and cons. I think I'm more on the con side, that I prefer it to be organic and real. And yeah, I can see both sides of the coin on that one. But.
Yeah.
All right, Widowmaker. We're going back into Texas Gothic territory. What do you think of this song?
I love me Widowmaker. I love that. I love the intro. I love the slow build. It's just an emotional story. Great guitar work from both Piper and Holmes on this. It's just a moody, atmospheric track. Probably easily in my top 3 of this from this album. For me, I've always loved this song. This is just such a great track. It's just one of those songs where you just feel like when I'm singing it in the car, I felt like I was becoming the character, and I was singing, "The cries of sand is never." I could you just become that character, and that's what Widowmaker was for me always. I've always loved this track.
Yeah, it's a wall of sound. And you can tell that Spencer Proffer is using all the tools available to paint this picture. It's cinematic.
Yes, very cinematic.
This gives you a window to, I think, what Blackie wanted to achieve with the band. And I think he's one of those characters that he's got these big ambitions. And he's got a band, and he's trying to push them to do these great, ambitious plans. But sometimes you can only push people so far, and they have, I don't know the word, whether it's limitations, both in personality, both in drive, both in ability. And that's why it got to a point where Blackie would play every instrument, do all the arrangements, do all the songwriting himself, because he thinks that I can't work in that band environment. There are some people that are not collaborators and cannot work in that band environment because their vision is just so big. And that song in the album is his vision, because it's just huge sound.
Yes. Very much so. Very, very much so. And it's just, he's got a solo writing credit on it. It's absolutely great side closer.
Yep.
Great side A closer.
Yep. Rightio. Blind in Texas. What's your views on this one?
Blind in Texas always was a fun track. You got it was just a straight up rock and roll 12-bar bluesy song. And again, talks about life on the road, and maybe getting a little too, maybe a little too snoggered after a while. I don't know, but I think it tells I think it's a humorous story. It's a chugging song. It's a great live, staple of the set. You get the crowd participation going with it. It's just, to me, it was always a favorite track of mine. Again, as cheesy and as goofy as it sounds, it just is a straight up rock and roll track. And it just shows how much Blackie was just deep down, he just was like a rock and roll band. I don't know if he ever really, how much he really refers to himself as a metal band or a metal singer. He always felt like it was just straight up heavy rock and roll or whatever, you know. And to me, I always thought Blind in Texas was exactly that, just a great rock and roll track.
Yeah. And I was thinking when I was preparing for this show that for a period of time, maybe 1984, Texas was the hot thing. You had ZZ Top, you had Eliminator, all the imagery, anything about the Wild West and Texas, well, to overseas folk with me, it was kind of like the flavor of the month.
Yeah,
and
I can see that.
And I think that you know, Blackie was putting a little bit of pop culture in, you know, his lyrical references, you know, with the Texas, the Wild West, and picking up of the that sort of theme from maybe ZZ Top. But yeah, this got a fair amount of video airplay in Australia. Didn't really sort of kickstart any popularity for W.A.S.P into the mainstream, other than, you know, the metalheads. But I definitely recall seeing the Goofy film clip. Watch it today. It's got a little bit of charm, and it's kind of, it's cheesy, but it's no worse than a rap video clip, I guess. Some of those ones.
And again, it's such a fun song live. You know, when I was at the show, I'll tell this really quick story. I ran into somebody I knew at the show that I was not expecting to see, so it was pretty cool. And he was kind of standing like a couple people away from me, and we got to the line of, you know, what you trying to do? What's the matter with you? What you trying to do? I looked over and was like, hey, what's the matter with you? Or what you trying to do? You know, we both looked at, we both had the same idea. So you know, but it's just a fun song.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only person, I don't think Blackie would be Blind in Texas. I think that'd be most likely Chris Holmes. And I've got to put a shout out for Chris. He everyone knows he's Personer, but his guitar playing, he's got talent. He's got great chops, great playing.
Absolutely. And so does Randy. And if you can pick it out, I mean, Randy Piper does too. You know, you could kind of tell his stuff a little bit, but you could definitely tell more of it was Chris. Chris just had a certain kind of legato. He kind of had that fluttery, you know, a lot of that kind of stuff. Whereas Randy's
highly regarded in the LA Sunset strain, and
absolutely he was.
Eddie Van Halen borrowed his guitar. There's a story that Chris has put up on his YouTube clip about his, you know, he knew Eddie Van Halen in the early days, and Eddie borrowed his guitar. So Chris has got a musically a high reputation, but it's just unfortunate that he's Personer in that day, and the decline of Western civilization perpetrated this type of image as a buffoon. Yeah. So kind of, that's a good word. Yeah,
that's a good word. But hey, God bless him. God bless him. He's good. He's gotten through his cancer, and
he's doing okay. Is he?
Seems to be. I think he last I heard, he was in remission. So I think he was doing a few shows here and there. But I think he seems to be doing okay.
Yeah. Look, the documentary Mean Man, he comes across as a really, really nice and genuine, the real deal sort of guy.
Oh yeah.
And, quite a moving documentary. All right. Prize in the Night.
So this one falls in the same slot as Sleeping in the Fire, if you go track by track. So you kind of have the little power ballad thing here in the seventh spot. Cries in the Night has a long history. First heard with the Killer Kane band. You know, Arthur Kane being from the Dolls. Yeah, and he had a little band and they did a couple of tracks. Back then was known as Mr. Cool, but everything else about the song is pretty much the same, except for I'm Mr. Cool. Yeah, that's all. It was different. So he reworks the song and calls it Cries in the Night. Still a very moody ballad song, If I was going to compare it to Sleeping in the Fire, I'll take Sleeping in the Fire. I like that one a lot more than I do Cries in the Night, but I love Cries in the Night. Always have. Again, great track. I think it's another one of those. I think it's another one of those songs that kind of says, I stand and scream, I'm not going to fall. It's like he wants to keep pushing forward and he's going to make it no matter what. And sometimes you get these, I lose a dream and I go crazy. Well, I think people feel that. So still a great track. And again, great guitar work from both Holmes and Piper on this one.
Yeah. Again, big sound. Love it.
Very big.
It's got a very big sound, and you can tell that they're using all the production bells and whistles on this song. And I agree with everything you've said on that one.
Yeah.
The Last Command.
Here we are, the last command. I love this song. Again, it just builds you up, and it's like it's almost like listening to like the speech in Braveheart. It's like you're ready to go out and you're ready to go fight. You know, whether it's the last thing you do, you're going to go out there and you're going to give it all you got. Well, I felt that way when I was 16. I still feel that way now. And to me, Last Command is always another one of those strong tracks. Love everything about it.
Do you think there's a slight, maybe inherent biblical reference as the Last Command? I know he wasn't going through his religious phase. He was on the opposite end. Do you think there's what is the Last Command?
Let's see. To me, it just sounds like I just think it's just one of those things where it's like the dream to fight for what you believe in, and you're going to keep fighting that fight. I kind of really think that's what this song's about. So, and again, it's just delivered in a way that it just pumps you up, and it's like, yeah.
This song is definitely where it seems that he's pushing the band.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I was saying, that I think he's one of these guys, he's a go-getter, and he'll push and push to have his vision. And I can tell that he's probably frustrating the hell of the band. I don't know what he's like in the recording studio, but this is my perception as an outsider, that he's got them all in the studio and he's just take after take after take and just pushing them to he's got this sort of vision in his head and he just wants to get it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the frustration over this band.
Yeah.
That he has got these dreams, and because he can't do everything at once at this particular point in time, he's got to get his vision through these other people. And that's where there's frustration. Yeah. And it's probably him and Chris.
Yeah.
And
probably.
he's probably older. Because let's face it, you know, he's had more experience. He joined the Dolls in 75. Now you look at Chris Holmes, they're younger. They were like 78, 79. So he's had a bit more experience. He's been around the block a bit more. And he's got this, in 1983, 84, he's got this business vision and he's a bit more world weary and knows where he wants to go. And he knows that the way for this band is not just to party on and go down that path where some members have. That's where later frustrations have occurred. So this song is where I think he's, again, pushing the band as far as he can with that vision. Yeah.
Yeah. I've read that he has a reputation to being a perfectionist in the studio.
Master.
Yeah. In fact, I think it was like Neon God Part 2. It was noted that it was like all of a sudden, here comes this album out. And I'm like, wow, that was like, it was a very short span of time from from the previous album, you know, and it was just amazing that he worked it that fast. I've listened to a lot of stuff from Q&As from the meet and greets that he did from this tour. And he will say the rock and roll lifestyle is not for the faint at heart. It is, you got to really want it. And if you're going in there and you don't want it, then you need to find another line of work. Yeah. He talked one time where he went into a place and he saw his face on a lot of these magazines, and it really went to his head, and he started living that rock and roll lifestyle. And this was after this album. And he said the following album, I wound up producing a really crappy album because of me living this rock and roll lifestyle. He's referring to Electric Circus. And, I think he realized that he had to get away from being like that. So there's so many great clips, for anybody who's watching this, go check out clips of meet and greets.
Absolutely.
There's so many great stories I've heard about the band and Blackie and stuff. So
did you feel, and this is seriously in your heart, did you feel that he was actually giving himself in these Q&As, or it was a very rehearsed, confined type answers? Do you think he was really digging deep and doing a confessional, or it's just a very well rehearsed story again and again and again?
I think it was how some of the questions were phrased, because I do know he told the story of like there's a story going out there where it was during the Metallica Raven and Metallica Armored Saint and W.A.S.P tour from early 80s or like mid 80s, and like Metallica and W.A.S.P traded off who was going to open or who was going to close rather. And there was a time where Blackie's in the dressing room, and Cliff Burton comes in and he's like, Blackie, where's the stage? I can't figure out where the stage is. Man, I don't know. We got here late too. I have yet to figure out where the stage is. And Cliff Burton just looked at him and said, screw you, Blackie. And he thunders off. Yeah, he's hearing Metallica's music starting. And then like 2 minutes later, he finally hears the bass kicking in. So he finally got to the stage. So I heard, apparently that story made the rounds a few times because I saw that pop up a couple times. He would also tell of a story where the first album was like the version we've come to know and love was like the fourth or fifth time the album had been recorded. He heard some early demos from like the second or third time, and to use his words, were absolutely vicious. And he was blown away by what he heard. So I know that story's made it around a couple of times. He would talk about the Major Dan story about his, because people would ask him about his faith, and it was the whole Major Dan from Forrest Gump story of, he either found Jesus to be a fool, a liar, or the Lord, and he determined it was the latter. So you had a lot of those kind of questions, but then you got some other good things too. A lot of people were asking about Crimson Idol. Yeah. Why did he get into the business?
You don't think it was overly rehearsed? You think it was sort of off the cuff and the real him? Yeah.
I think some of it. I think a good chunk of it was the real him. Some stories I think he was able to weave in because it made for good stories. Yeah. But I think for the most part, I think he really came off genuine.
Yeah, absolutely. Running Wild in the Street.
This one you can definitely hear the Spencer Proffer, and the reason I say that is in the backing vocals. It sounds like you can definitely hear. It was almost like they took stuff from Metal Health and they lifted it off and plopped it on this track. And I think some of the guys from Quiet Riot actually do backing vocals on that song.
Yes, you're right. Carlos and. Maybe Frankie, whatever. Yeah.
But anyway, it to me another kind of song that kind of feeds off of Last Command. I think it kind of goes in that same direction where it's like I'm running to beat hell. It looks like I got to be the leader. Wait a minute. Yeah, I'm running to beat hell. Looks like I got to be the leader as my forces yell. You can hear. So again, you're getting into battle and you're getting into the gangland kind of stuff. So yeah, you're running. I think it's a good. Again, solid track. Good, another good song. But the gang vocal, definitely you can hear that Quiet Riot feel and the Spencer Proper feel. So yeah, but I think it's another great banger.
Well, Blackie has related in interviews that he's loved doing the double track vocal all his life because of the Beatles. He said two of the biggest influences musically for him before classic rock of the 70s was Elvis and the Beatles. And he says that he just really enjoys doing that double tracking, and that's all through this album. You can tell, like, the thing I like about the difference between the first and the second album, you can see that there is progression sonically. As I said, I still think the first album I prefer because it's raw, it's got that energy. Even though this is more polished and commercial, there is a certain maturity sonically that he's exploring, because you get a lot of bands that they just do the same thing again and again and again. And again and again.
Yep.
Sex Drive.
Talking about maturity.
That was a nice little segue.
Again, great song when you're 16. Not so great as when you're 53. This one is another one. It's kind of low on my totem pole. It's again, not a bad song. It was, again, I loved it as a kid and as a teenager into my 20s, but it just had, I don't know. It just, it's a fun album closer, but after you experience a lot of the maturity of a lot of the songs, and then you get this thing.
It's probably not the strongest album closer. This was actually workshopped in or played in Sister, which was Randy Piper and Blackie Lawless's band. Maybe they should have kept it there. And another thing is, when you look at some of the B-sides that they've done in the day, like Mississippi Queen, they could have just put that as an album closer. So I think that
Savage.
Yeah.
Savage. I love Savage. I thought that was an awesome track. I'm like, why did you guys leave this off the album? I don't know what they would have replaced it with.
Exactly. So I think we both agree this is probably the stinker track. It's not that great. Yeah. And it's probably third division Kiss. So that's Last Command. It probably didn't. It went number 49 in the US, 48 in UK. Actually, in the UK, I did a show with John the Music Nut, and we were talking about bands that are bigger in other territories other than their homeland. And John was rattling off all these stats about W.A.S.P having a bit of a strike rate with singles in the UK. They started to get a little bit of following from this album. They were doing the Castle Donington and all those sort of music festivals and getting a little bit of heat over in the UK, which I found quite interesting, and then into Europe. But this was probably the last. Sorry,
I was about to say, but think back to what their first video cassette thing they put out was Live at the Lyceum. That's over in England, and that I mean, you think about that show, golly, that thing's legendary. To see that thing.
Absolutely. So this album was probably the end of the road commercially in America. They're on a big label, Capitol. That's like blue chip. That's a blue chip label. And they definitely they had Rod Smallwood on the managerial side with Iron Maiden. So they had a lot of heavy hitters behind them, but that was the end of the road for them commercially.
Yeah.
I think they made a big misstep where they changed the image, lost the shock rock elements completely, because you can see they're starting to lose the shock rock elements. So the first album huge shock rock elements. It's really out there. It's kind of like a horror movie. Second one, you've got that Texas Gothic feel. There's still a little bit of shock rock in it, but it's becoming more commercial. But the third, I would equate it, the imagery is like Girls, Girls, Girls by Motley Crue, where they're just wearing leathers. There's no
Pretty
makeup,
much.
and you pretty well see Blackie as he is in his, he's like in his civvies. And
Pretty much.
to me, it's like a hair metal band, and that's why Inside the Electric Circus is not really favorably looked at, because they were just another generic hair metal band.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole story where they had to regroup, and he went into a more mature, a different sort of wheelhouse, which I'm sure you'll cover on your channel one day, hopefully.
One day. when life calms down, I really am going to start doing a series where I wouldn't mind going through a deep dive on all the albums too. So and get a panel of folks that we can kind of do it with.
Absolutely.
But it's because I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about.
A couple of questions for you. So, in respect of the W.A.S.P show to our overseas viewers, because it's generated a lot of heat in America, because I simply think that it's like a long lost friend who's come back. And when I heard about the tour, I was thinking, is the audience still there? Obviously, there's an audience, and it's getting a lot of positive word of mouth. How many of the songs in the song set were from The Last Command that made this concert tour?
2.
Only 2.
Wild Child, and Blind in Texas.
Right.
The show starts off with a medley of On Your Knees, The Flame, Torture Never Stops, and Inside the Electric Circus. So that's your opening medley. You go into Love Machine, and then you go into Wild Child, and then he goes into 3 songs from Crimson Idol. And so you get The Idol, you get The Great Misconceptions of Me, and Chainsaw Charlie. So you get those. He then goes into Blind in Texas. And then you get a little break. They come out for the encore. You get the video for them doing Animal, which then they medleyed that with The Real Me, which I think I finally figured out why he did those 2 songs together. Yes, he had to do Animal if you're going to talk about back to the beginning. And I think it was good that he talked about the whole censorship thing, but then he ties in The Real Me. And I think when you get to the last verse of that song, I ended up with the preacher full of lies and hate. I think I seemed to scare him a little, so he showed me to the Golden Gate. And I think that's kind of how he was able to segue the 2 songs together. So this is who I really am now. I'm not the guy who does Animal, but I'm more this guy. So
can I ask you a controversial question? Sorry. So I know he's a man of faith and values. Like, there's a lot of rock artists that have become born again, and they completely drop the songs. Like Prince, in the later part of his career, basically did not play a lot of his salacious songs from Purple Rain. Maybe he might have brought it back right at the end, but there was a period when he was like a Seventh-day Adventist. He just completely dropped a lot of the early material. Blackie dropped a lot of the songs that he thought that was contrary to his faith. Why, if he still has these values, is he still putting these songs in the show? Because wouldn't you think that's in conflict with his religious values? I know he's saying, here it is, and here's my comparison, but wouldn't you say, I'm a person of faith and I don't want to really go there anymore? I would agree with that, and I still kind of wrestle with why he did it, but I think he stopped doing it in 2006, and he said mainly one of the bigger reasons was we were doing so much more mature songs,
And Animal is like so far removed from songs that he was, like a Shadow Man or Revengeance or, songs from some of the later albums. And he just felt like he got so far away from that style. He didn't, but as far as the Fate thing goes, the one thing I will say, you don't see him sing it. He's not actually singing that lyric. He lets the crowd yell it out. But he's also saying,
but he's complicit.
He's still doing the song. I get that. So
yeah. But
I don't know if that was ever asked at a Q&A, but I would love to have heard his answer for that.
I would love to be at the Q&A. I'd probably get thrown out because asking the tough questions. But to me, what I'm wrestling with, and don't get me wrong, I love W.A.S.P, but the thing I'm sort of working at, you can't have your toes in two camps. On the commerce side, you've got the early W.A.S.P, which is sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He is now a man of faith and born again Christian, and he had this stance that I'm not going to deal with this material. And now he's flipped over and he's doing it in both sides of the camp. I'm a born again Christian, but I've got my foot in commerce because that's the hits, and I'm going to sing it. It's coming out of his mouth. Yeah. And you can't have a stance of being a man of faith on one hand and then at the same time be singing lyrics that he doesn't believe in, he has no conviction for, and he's dead against. It's kind of a slight hypocrisy, and I'm sorry that might get viewer hate.
Yeah, no.
It's something that I'm wrestling with. I just think it's a little bit hypocritical.
Well, my question to him when I did the thing was like, when you started doing more spiritually themed lyrics and things of that nature, my thought was more like, did you get like encouragement or discouragement from fans is really what I wanted to ask him, but I forgot about the fans part. And he basically said neither. And he talked to Alice Cooper about that. And Alice Cooper and him had a long conversation because Alice Cooper's kind of in that same boat too.
No, he's not. I disagree because his lyrics would never go to the profane like song.
But like Cold Ethel or some of the more necrophilia type of songs, some of the songs like that. So I don't know how much. I don't know if he still does Cold Ethel or not. I hope not, but that's an awful song to begin with. But I think he the whole raising where they were raised was kind of the same boat. But I would be, I think it's kind of like I'm going to use me for a bizarre example. So you got my little do-it-yourself CD, right? And what's the last song? What's the last song on that thing? It's called Sadist. Okay. Awful track. I would never want people to listen to this track because it's just terrible. But I also say it's a reflection of my life. And okay, maybe Animal is how I was here, then Real Me is how I am now. I'm speculating. I'm trying to figure it out, but
I think we both are, and thank you. I'm sorry to put you on the spot there, but I know we touched upon this in the first episode of this when we did the W.A.S.P, and I wanted to sort of get your further reflections now that you've met him and you've seen the concert and we've had a good listen to The Last Command. But I'm still grappling with it because to me, I am too. Yeah.
I am too, because, also, he also got rid of the Disney-fied lyrics, like in Chainsaw Charlie. When you listen to the re-idolized version, he cleaned up the lyrics on that song. Instead of, there's a one particular section where Charlie describes himself, and it's definitely not PG. So re-idolized, he cleans that up. He goes back to singing the original lyrics now. So again, maybe he's feeling like, maybe he's just like, okay, it's like Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho also says he's a man of faith, but boy, you listen to some of his promos and in wrestling, or you listen to you read him on Twitter, and boy, he could be a potty mouth too. But yet he'll also talk about how much he likes Aaron Cross, Striper, and a lot of those Christian metal bands. But yet, you know,
I think that if Blackie was at his church and they sort of said play some W.A.S.P songs, I don't think he'd be playing Animal. So just saying. Anyway.
No, definitely not.
John, as always, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
And long overdue to do W.A.S.P. And look, I think that Blackie is a super intelligent guy. He's had a long history through. I think there's more stories to tell with the Blackie Lawless story, and I think he should write a book, because looking at his heritage, going back to dealings with the New York Dolls, the early part of the Sunset Strip, being signed to Capitol Records, the PRMC.
Mm-hmm. He says there's one in the works. So.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Definitely. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Please like and subscribe to my Music Corner. John, as always, happy New Year.
Merry Christmas to you. You got it. Cheers.